Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Charlotte Gedstead, and this is an overview of assistive technology and different ways that I've used it in my job and in my time as a classroom teacher. Let's jump on in. We're going to start off by examining the big picture and examine the context in which assistive technology lives and the context in which these learning tools can be used. Let's jump in. So when we think about disabilities, we have to take in mind the sociopolitical context, and this could be an entire other presentation, and there's a lot to say about that. But as a teacher, when you are working with students, especially those that might have a disability, you need to think about your own implicit bias and also the structuralized racialization that exists in our educational system. These things will limit academic performance of any student, and with students with learning disabilities, it may in fact bring out or limit them even more. So a couple examples of this are your own cultural expectations for student behavior and engagement, and then the deficit thinking paradigm, and just being aware of those biases as you're teaching all of your students. We could go into structural racialization, but that's not going to be what this presentation itself is about. But perhaps at a later date, we can examine how race and learning disabilities play out in our educational system. So let's unpack implicit bias, specifically around learning disabilities. So when you think about your classroom, how do your culturally accepted norms of student behavior impact your impression of a student? And I want you to think specifically of a student who had a learning disability diagnosis. Are your expectations of behavior, which are built on your own cultural norms, limiting a student in any way, or could they be coming from a different place, a different culture, or somewhere where your belief of what engagement looked like and the student's belief of what engagement looks like don't always match up? Another thing to think about is the deficit thinking paradigm. So the deficit thinking paradigm is the attribution of student academic performance on motivation, mindset, family values, or an internal deficit. Instead, if we zoom out and we consider ways in which we may be implicit or complicit in a student underperforming, we can identify other factors that may contribute to a student not achieving success. And this is relevant for students with learning differences and also with students who do not have learning differences. And when we think about the insider's perspective, so when I talk about the insider's perspective, I'm talking specifically about a student who has a learning disability, talking about their perspective of working and being a student in the education system. There is the understanding that a cognitive difference is only considered a disability in certain educational contexts. So if we unpack that and we think about that, is it really a disability if it's only popping up in certain educational contexts? Or is it the educational context that is too limiting in its beliefs for student engagement, performance, or anything else like that? So I mentioned earlier about the insider's perspective in my last slide, and I just want to take a moment to unpack a little bit about what the insider perspective is for a student with a learning disability going through school. And this is based off of research, and I've linked the research articles here, but I've followed Rachel Lambert from UW and then other professors from UC Santa Barbara who do research on students with specifically dyslexia, because that's my current interest, but take the time to unpack what it's like for a learner. A lot of the information we have on students who go through, who have learning disabilities, are typically from the doctor or medical perspective, from the outsider perspective. So I really recommend doing some digging to see from the insider perspective to develop that empathy. First, all of these students report a stigma of the diagnosis, right? The idea that they're pulled from the classroom, there's whispered conversations, people change the way that they treat the student, and there's a certain air of mystery around the diagnosis before they get it, which kind of builds on and leaves the student feeling anxious. There's also this binary conceptualization, right? Normal, not normal. This is the way that we do it. This is the way that you do it. So instead of providing almost a spectrum of opportunity, it's either or. And that's a pretty consistent theme in a lot of interviews. And finally, like I said earlier, this contextualized disability due to the cognitive differences established from the norm. So we should always question when an established norm is creating a disability for a whole swath of learners. We should always stop and examine and think about how are we contributing to this and how can we work to make this better. So that brings me to, what's your role as a teacher? Your role as a teacher is to practice culturally responsive teaching with your linguistically diverse students. That's your role. You need to be the one to examine your own biases, to examine how your own expectations might be limiting your students or creating a context in which a child is not able to access content. And related to that, you have to teach with an eye for accessibility. And I'm going to go into some ways that you can start to examine your own practices for that. But I want to be really clear that this is just a jumping off point. This is by no means comprehensive. This is hopefully just to get you thinking about this and excited about it and start your journey towards learning more about it. So let's talk about training our eye for accessibility. In reality, accessibility is all around you. I'm talking about assistive technology, and I'm talking about a really small branch of assistive technology around dyslexia and language-based processing disorders. But in reality, assistive technology and accessible technology exist for any kind of disability: cognitive, physical, intellectual, temporary disability. There are so many different aspects of technology that I was not aware of because I did not know how to use it. And because for me, the default setting is that it's off. However, there's invisible design features coded into websites and formatting for screen readers that are established for all websites. And then there's also specific font choices. So the font choice I'm using here in this website is actually really intentional. It's called Open Dyslexic, and it's a font specifically designed to help make words and letters easier to differentiate and thus easier to read for learners with diagnosis. There's also a whole bunch of hidden accessibility features across operating systems. Both Apple and Windows 10 have dictation and screen reading software embedded within their operating system if you know where to look. In addition to just within the operating system, there's downloadable apps, extensions, and programs to help build accessibility in what you're teaching. Within the classroom, because again, when we think about, and my background is as an elementary school classroom teacher. So I started teaching 4th grade, I've taught 3rd grade, and then I went up to middle school as a technology specialist, and now I'm a director of technology. So when I think about assistive technology, I'm thinking more about a mainstream elementary school classroom, and then again, in the context of a middle school specialist classroom. Assistive technology, it can pretty much be dropped into these 4 buckets. Keyboarding and spell check. So keyboarding, there's plenty of programs that exist that allow for practice of keyboarding, and we start as early as 4th grade, which is not uncommon. The other aspect of keyboarding that I grouped with it, but could be its own subgroup, is spell check and grammar check. We're all familiar with the word processing programs that underline the words that are spelled incorrectly or something that's grammatically incorrect. There are also predictive texts that will help the student as they're typing to connect to a word that they might not be able to sound out. And for learners who have difficulties with phonics, this is particularly helpful. Additionally, there's also programs like Grammarly that will read through for tone that can pick up on the context and provide the correct word based on context, not just on how the word is spelled. And finally, there's also spelling programs that help the user compile personal dictionaries for words that are often or frequently misspelled and help them develop that practice. Speech to text includes dictation. Like I said, there's dictation software embedded in almost all operating systems. So Windows 10 has a shortcut, and iOS has a pretty easy shortcut as well too. There's also a lot of dictation software. Dragon Dictation is one of them. I'm not a huge fan for paying for things, so I highly recommend exploring the built-in accessibility features before you go explore other ones. But one benefit of the paid programming is that if you have a child who has speech deficit, the speech recognition software that's designed to really pick up on an individual's speech patterns will be better suited than the built-in iOS ones. Text-to-speech pertains to screen readers. So every website is coded for a screen reader to be able to run through it in a logical way. Again, iOS, Windows 10 have built-in screen readers. You just have to know where to find them. And then there's a few other examples of extensions or applications that help screen read for web pages or for documents. And then finally, multimodal access. And when I say multimodal access, I'm referring to audiobooks, videos, any other way to get the content to the student that's not necessarily a chunk of text on the page, or that is also in addition to the chunk of text on the page. So obviously we can't just throw all of these things at our students and expect them to pick them up and integrate them on their own, and nor can we just throw them all onto our plate at once. Instead, it's got to be a pretty structured introduction of each thing in an already pretty structured protocol. So one of the things that I've worked on as a tutor is developing a systematic approach to integrating technology at a middle school level for reading and writing. Specifically for writing, one of the places that you have to start is keyboarding. So if we're moving into an online format, or if we're moving to a word processing based format, students have to have comfort and speed with keyboarding. And that's holding them accountable that their hands are in the right place, and that we are offering this as an accommodation for students that have dysgraphia, or for students for whom handwriting is really laborious. And this is also where I want to pause and point out that our implicit bias often gets in the way here. There's so many times where the default expectation is that something must be handwritten when it could in fact be typed. So anytime that you're thinking about assigning a piece of work, really take the moment to reflect on whether or not it would be your student would be able to demonstrate mastery by simply typing as opposed to handwriting. There's a bunch of typing programs that exist, and you can explore the web for them. And like I said, we have to incorporate software into a predefined editing process. So just like keyboarding is a piece of the structured process, same with the spell check. If we have our students try to do spell check after every word that they're creating, the writing process is going to be just as laborious as it was when they were handwriting. For me, in my context, I tend to have the student just get everything out on the paper and then go back and go correct for spelling, and then go back and correct for grammar, and then go back and then make the revisions, and then go back and correct for spelling, so that there's some relief in it not being perfect the first time. Here's some examples of great spelling programs and grammar programs that work with the reader, and most of these are free because, like I said, I like free things. Text-to-speech programs is really how I got into this whole aspect of assistive technology when I moved or started working at Hamlin Robinson. And so what I discovered is that, well, I didn't discover it because this existed, but what I learned about was that there is tools everywhere for students to be able to access content. We're a Microsoft school, so I cannot speak highly enough about the Microsoft Immersive Reader and Learning Tools sections. Google also has extensions, and also there are actual pieces of hardware that you can purchase to help read text aloud. Again, like I said, this is more of a jumping off point. I'm not going to go in and demo each tool for this particular presentation. Maybe at a later date I can make those presentations, but this is really just for you to get curious and examine where can you start to build these in. Text-to-speech programs I use in my writing process as well too. So I use text-to-speech to have the child reread their work to make sure things sound the way that they should, listening for those pauses, listening to make sure that the tenses are correct, listening to make sure that the word that the spell check may have corrected but put in incorrectly is the word that they actually want. So text-to-speech can be used to listen to the document on the webpage, but also as a part of the editing process. And then speech-to-text, which is the dictation. And again, not going to go into every single one of these. There are so many tools out there. These are just starting points for you all to explore. But this is also a part of my writing process, of course. So my students will often toggle between keyboarding and dictation. If they are trying to spell a word and they just cannot figure out how to even start that word, they start to type in, it's just absolute gibberish. The dictation tool pops in there so they can just say the word and then have it started. Highly recommend this. I think that it takes the stress off of getting something correct and it allows the student to move on pretty quickly. It does not happen right away. It takes a lot of time for the child to get very fluent at toggling between keyboarding and dictation. And I highly recommend allowing time to practice dictation. For students for whom the blank page is really daunting or for who have a really hard time just getting those words down, dictation can relieve some of that stress and perfectionism of wanting to get everything correct. So I highly recommend exploring these tools and seeing what else is out there. So on my YouTube channel, I think I've included this tour, and I'm just going to highlight it again here too, because this is a great example of multimodal access. This teacher put together their teams. They've included files of them reading aloud the story. They've included video demos of how to fill out a handout. They've included different ways to access content within Teams. There's Immersive Reader as well too. I also have a link here and on my YouTube channel of my examples of asynchronous lessons where I will give an overview of the lesson. I will introduce vocabulary words and they will appear on the screen along with the definition. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use videos and the tools that come with all computers to create a multimodal lesson. And some of tools that I love are Screencast-O-Matic, Screencastify, and Zoom. They're all pretty straightforward in terms of video recording. And then iMovie and Windows Movie Maker are great video editing, although Screencast-O-Matic has a video editor if you're willing to pay a little bit more. That one I did put down money for. So there's like a lot of information here and there's a lot of different ways that we could go, and I understand how overwhelming it is, and I'm 3 years into this and still discovering and building practices and still learning more and more about different ways that students can effectively utilize these tools. So again, this is a jumping off point for us to think about how we can become responsive teachers to all of the learners in our classroom. Overall, just remember to teach with an eye for accessibility. So think about your final product, think about your assessments, and think about how your expectations might carry implicit bias. So I've outlined a couple ideas here, but just a reminder that there are so many different ways for a child to demonstrate mastery that if we get so stuck on everyone demonstrating mastery the same way, we're doing a disservice to the diversity of learners in our classroom. So take a moment to really think about the final product of any unit that you're planning and think about, can I provide a menu of ways, or can I, for just a moment, imagine different ways that a child might be able to demonstrate mastery that aren't necessarily the initial product I had mastered out. Then get a little bit more granular. Examine your lesson structure. Where can you insert multimodal access when you're delivering content or revisiting concepts? And you don't have to do this every single lesson, especially as you're starting out. Maybe think about, how can I include a video for one thing? How can I include a vocabulary review video? How can I include a read aloud with images? How can I include an opportunity for a child to view content, maybe view a video beforehand to build that background knowledge? And then again, plan for a diversity of student performance and engagement. Where and when can you offer assistive technology tools as an option for student behavior and demonstration of understanding? And I would highly recommend thinking about providing these tools for all students, not just ones with diagnosable learning disorder. Think about how you can best serve your entire class by offering these tools, because these by no means are only helpful for those students, they're helpful for all students. And then something that I tell myself a lot, so I hope it's helpful for you all, that done is better than perfect. You don't have to have a perfect lesson every time, and your unit won't always be perfect every time you deliver it. That's one of the joys of being a teacher, is that every year is an iteration of the year before, so every year is an opportunity to grow and learn. So test out the tools, get your feet wet, and then dive deeper next time. Hope you enjoyed this, hope it was helpful, and have a great day. And before I let you go, here's some tips for how to start. Simplify, 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 simplify. Reduce the amount of text, reduce the amount of work, especially during a remote teaching environment, and reduce the amount of busyness in your virtual learning space. Increase time for practice. More so than you think. Increase access to success. So that means, when I say access to success, I mean, how can a student demonstrate mastery, and make sure there's a variety of ways, and increase the modalities of communication. Don't just rely on you talking to them. Don't just rely on the written handouts you're giving out. Increase the different ways that students can access your content. And then outline a process or protocol for work and keep the process visible. One of the ways that I do that with my students that I'm tutoring in writing is we have a mapped out writing process where the student is aware of each step that they're on, and that helps them develop accountability and independence in what they're doing, and also confidence as they watch that process play out. It helps them trust in the process, and it helps them trust in their learning. So good luck and happy teaching.